Welcome on board, matey. Today I want to talk about a character that I feel like has been kind of swept under the carpet a little bit, these last couple of years. A character who was once considered to be one of the top contenders for the final boss of the entire series, who I think, people are actually crazy underestimating right now. Akainu. For a reason, it's very clear that Oda has put Akainu in that crazy infamous panel that shows all the contenders for the One Piece and kind of the big parties for the endgame of the story. And there have been so many things set up with his character. There is so much unresolved history. No one that Luffy probably hates more in the entire world than Akainu. And weirdly enough, even still, I, as you might know, am of the strong belief that Oda has been sneakily setting up a redemption arc for Akainu that might end up with him betraying the world government, betraying Imo and the Gorosei, and whether that means he will, actually join Luffy or do his own thing or maybe reunite with his probably old best friend Dragon. I want to talk about that in this video with you today because he's going to be one of the big final players in the story. And just to be completely clear here, the main point of this video is going to be, the crazy arc that I think Oda is planning for Akainu and everything that might mean for him, his story arc, and just the Marines and potentially even Sword as an organization overall. But I think we kind of, it's been a while, need a little bit of a refresher of why I even think that Akainu is such an important character in the story, and also what he's just been up to lately while we've been going from Wano to Egghead to Elbaf right now. Now, I don't need to tell you that Akainu possesses one of the most broken devil fruits in the entire series. He's the wielder of the Magu Magu no Mi, the Magma fruit, that has been stated before to be among the highest tier offensive fruit powers in the entire story, if not even the most destructive fruit. Now, to be fair, this is a statement that is quite old at this point, but I would still assume it very much holds up. That means that Akainu's devil fruit, not even speaking about anything else he's got going on there, is up there with the likes of Whitebeard's fruits, like anything else that we've been seeing, and it kind of explains also why he's standing at the top of the Marines in the story. On top of that, we can of course also assume that Akainu has pretty much advanced versions of all three types of haki. Now, to be fair, we don't know if Akainu has Conqueror's haki, but at the same time, if Garp had it, and then Akainu is now the Fleet Admiral, if he doesn't have Conqueror's haki or even advanced Conqueror's haki, what are we even doing in the story? And look at him. This man, if he wasn't a Marine, would be ready to conquer. I mean, to be fair, we even always get this little cool image that Oda has of him as a child, and Akainu as a kid just kind of looks like a pirate, and I feel like with his personality and just his crazy, let's call it passion to eradicate every single pirate and unlawful person in the world, he absolutely, to me, would count as a conqueror. And funnily enough, I also think that his conqueror spirit is kind of the thing that has him clashing with the higher up authorities right now, particularly the Gorosei. So keep that in mind for our later section down the road. And again, seeing how many lower ranking Marines in the story actually have pretty good, observation haki and even future sight, looking at Garp, looking at Kobe, looking at some other characters, it just seems a given that to be an admiral and to be on that level that can compete with forces like the Yonko, you would need, future sight and pretty good observation haki. We actually already know that all of the admirals can actually use advanced armament haki because we see them using Ryo during the war when they do the weird wall thing, which is then explained way later during Wano when Hyogoro teaches that same technique to Luffy as advanced armaments. And of course, just seeing that Akainu is the guy who's just throwing punches with all the most powerful people in the world, we see him clashing with Shanks, though to be fair, Shanks just kind of sneaks in there, and Akainu would have loved to keep going. I don't know what you're thinking, but Akainu was the one guy who just would have absolutely liked to square off with Shanks there. He goes against Whitebeard, obviously, very famously, even though he gets squashed a little bit, he still keeps standing up, and honestly, at the end of the war, Akainu isn't exactly amongst the people who I would say were very close here to breaking down and being defeated. He kind of looked still pretty fit despite being pummeled into the ground by the earthquake fruit, so that to me tells me that he has crazy endurance. He also just has crazy offensive power, not just with his devil fruit, but also just purely physically, again squaring off against anyone who dared to stand in front of him, and also a lot of people who didn't dare to stand in front of him anyways. I mean, a warlord like Jinbei who protected Luffy really looked like he had no shot whatsoever to be in the same range as Akainu there, or even like, like looking at Crocodile and all these people, there was nowhere in the world where any of the warlords who already should be fairly strong, especially at that point in the story, would even be close to Akainu or even have any chance of touching him. And that's all on top of the idea that kind of Akainu probably was holding back pretty hard. Like, let's be real here, a lot of the admirals, I don't think we saw any of them really going all out at Marineford at all. Like, the craziest thing we ever got was maybe, Kuzan freezing that giant tsunami that, Whitebeard summoned with his earthquake fruit. But let's be real, if Akainu started to basically turn the entire battlefield into magma, that would be pretty bad for all the world government allies and would just destroy, the headquarters itself. So I personally am really convinced that Akainu kind of had orders, or maybe even was reasonable enough himself to be like, okay, if I go all out here, I might win, but then everyone, including my allies, also dies, which, probably not that great, for his employment status. And we actually know how crazy Akainu probably can get because of the crazy duel that he had with Aokiji on Punk Hazard, where his fighting just turned half the entire island into a volcanic magma hellscape that is still melty on flames and just, absolutely, I mean, look at it. You know what Punk Hazard looks like. This is probably what would have happened to all of Marineford, and again, I think the admirals probably were nerfed to a certain degree by their environment. I also think that Kuzan probably held back just because he's kind of a good guy, I personally still think. I think Kizaru actually is kind of lazy and didn't want to get his hands too dirty. He didn't really do too much, if we're honest, at Marineford, and he kind of just isn't the guy. Akainu, though, I think would have been very much willing to just magma blast everything and just didn't do that because collateral damage. If you're now wondering, Manu, why are you sucking off Akainu so hard at the beginning of this video? Well, it's kind of to establish, remember how broken this guy is, and we haven't ever actually seen him go all out and what he can actually do. There is this very infamous quote by Oda where he once joked that if Akainu actually had been the protagonist, One Piece would have ended within a year. Now, just to be clear, this is often misquoted. It actually didn't mean that Akainu just solos the entire universe, especially now knowing about the Gorosei powers and the Holy Knights and Imu. That doesn't mean that Akainu is just strong enough to solo the entire world here. What it does mean, though, is that a protagonist that would be as strong as Akainu is would just be so overwhelming that it kind of removes all the tension and any narrative struggle, and basically Akainu just skips to the end of One Piece and then maybe struggles a little bit, is what Oda was basically saying, which should give you a really good feeling for his importance in the story and why I think, despite everything crazy and all the god stuff that's going on in Elbaf right now, all of that aside, we should absolutely count him in to have a very big and tangible impact on the outcome of One Piece as a whole, I think. But with all of that out of the way now, allow me to go back a little bit to his magma powers, because it's kind of interesting looking at them, with everything we've also seen recently in the story and all the lore reveals and about the ancient history and, the abyss powers and Luffy's god powers, etc., etc. The good thing about Akainu's powers is that, magma obviously kind of fire adjacent. His kind of, powers look kind of like fire powers, only that they're basically Ace's and Sabo's fruit on steroids, way crazier, way more powerful, kind of this liquid fire, you know what magma basically is, right? Going really crazy. It's very interesting also that his powers specifically seem very well suited against a lot of the other crazy shenanigans we've been seeing in the story, specifically ancient technology, right? Look at stuff like Emeth or whatever Vegapunk has been cooking up with, all the robots and the pacifista. If there's anything that's really good at destroying technology, it's just melting all the metal and melting all the parts and just destroying it. Look at the Holy Knights. I mean, we know about their mortality in the Abyss. We also know about Summer's weird mechanical heart, right, with the valves and everything. I mean, I would just go out on a limb here and say that if Akainu actually just melted down, Summers, he would probably die. I think that heart would probably not be able to actually withstand this level of destructive power. It also, of course, kind of, with all or many of the devil fruit users in the story goes really well with his personality, because we meet him as this irrationally angry, hateful guy, very emotional and passionate, and that, of course, kind of with his name, Red Dog, Akainu, goes very well with a guy who literally erupts like a volcano. And it's not exactly subtle, but it absolutely works, I think. One thing I am actually kind of interested in, though, with these like fire-adjacent powers is the idea of the Forbidden Sun and, everything we've been learning about this like ultimate power source that everyone's looking for. We know that Vegapunk has been working on it. We know that Emu wants it. Luffy seems connected in some way, shape, or form. We kind of have the weird hints at it maybe being related to like an actual sun, not just being like flames, but an actual sun, as in like fusion or really hot, like a fusion material, basically. For example, Blackbeard, I'm not sure if you remember this, we talked about this, that all of Blackbeard's abilities are actually named after a black hole. Like, it's basically, Blackbeard's darkness fruit is a collapsed star. He has Liberation, which is kind of similar to Luffy's Nika powers, right? Who is also like the sun god, which is a star. He has Black Hole. He kind of has the gravity effect where he can suck people towards and like suck people in. It's just a black hole, is Blackbeard's the darkness powers are a dead star, basically, right? So there's all these things. Kind of makes you wonder if even Akainu's like magma powers might have some importance with the Forbidden Sun. We talked about the idea before. I'm not sure if you remember this one, that potentially the Forbidden Sun might be the Earth's core or might be inside the Earth, because in the mural, we of course see people in the first world going down into the Earth on these ancient elevators and then coming back up with what looks like these star fragments, which then would presumably be the Forbidden Sun, this ancient power source that was harvested in the first world. And if the Forbidden Sun is from inside the One Piece world, that would kind of coincide with what is inside our planet, magma, right? And so, I don't know, you could actually have like an interesting connection there. Now, I'm not saying that Akainu's devil fruit is the Forbidden Sun fruit or anything like that, but all I'm saying is that probably Akainu with his devil fruit powers could maybe cheat a little bit and create a at least decently powerful replica, or something that's at least to a certain degree able to power things that might need the Forbidden Sun. Maybe not at 100%, but at least, would make it work in some way, shape, or form. I think that's something we should absolutely keep on the radar. After all, magma kind of does represent the literal blood and heat of the planet itself, and if the One Piece world is a regular planet, right, that would kind of coincide with that, and Akainu having the powers of the planet to a certain degree. Also, in case you're someone wondering, Manu, Akainu isn't just an admiral anymore, he's now Fleet Admiral. Wouldn't that mean that he's even stronger than all the other admirals we have in the story right now, like Kizaru, Fujitora, Green Bull? To which I'm saying it's kind of hard to say, because we don't actually truly know what separates a Fleet Admiral from a normal admiral when it comes to just full combat capabilities. Like, I personally kind of had the feeling that the reason that Akainu and Aokiji were the two candidates to become Fleet Admiral were because they were the two strongest people in the Marines at that point. For all we know, though, it could have also been that Kizaru was like, I don't really care for this, you two figure it out. Really hard to say, and also just because Akainu got now promoted, that doesn't necessarily make him stronger, I think, than all the other admirals, because what he's technically doing is just a lot of paperwork right now. Again, we'll get to that. But you could still make the argument that he kind of got the job as potentially the strongest Marine in the entire organization, period. At least officially, he defeated Aokiji, so I feel like that would kind of track. Before we move on here, though, I do want to say that basically, whenever we see Akainu actually fight properly for the first time on screen, I personally am gonna expect that it's gonna completely redefine how strong he is and how we see his character. I am absolutely expecting Akainu appearing somewhere, going absolutely crazy, and all of us being like, wait, this guy was this powerful during Marineford as well? Why didn't he just level the battlefield? Again, I think that Marineford also, just to quickly throw it out there, I think that Marineford, the way we read it in the manga, probably was like seeing it through Luffy's eyes, or kind of like, like keeping away from all the crazy. I think that the war probably, if it happened now, with everything like hockey and everything, and we saw all the powers that we know about, I think it would look even crazier than we ever imagined and than it already was in the manga. I think that things absolutely went wild during the war, and, you know, Oda just kind of held back and was like, okay, I don't want to reveal proper haki quite yet. We don't want to see what it looks like. He didn't really reveal any awakenings yet. Like, a lot of stuff that I would assume he probably already had in mind at this point. We know that Luffy used Conqueror's haki without us knowing what it really was at that point, right? But again, I feel like if it was animated today, things would have been absolutely crazy. Plus, Akainu, obviously what we talked about earlier, being potentially nerfed. Just don't be surprised if we get the first crazy Akainu fight and we're all like, Jesus Christ, this guy is up there on the highest level and is going absolutely insane. All right, so now that we've kind of established where I place Akainu in terms of, you know, power and importance in the story, let's now talk about who actually gets to punch Akainu by the end of the series. So, even though I'm really excited to get to the part where we talk about Akainu potentially, you know, getting his little redemption arc and turning on the government and maybe even becoming something like a good guy, yes, I know, we'll get to why I think that, it's still very obvious that, you know, he was the person who killed Ace. He might be the person, I think it's pretty fair to say that he probably is the person that Luffy just hates the most in the entire world. Luffy has really been despising a lot of people, but the one thing that has been with him for the longest time, the one thing that has kind of inspired everything that has happened in his entire growth since the time skip, that has really shaken like everything that he believed about himself and the world, it's all thanks to Akainu taking Ace away from him right in front of his hands. To make things even worse, Ace of course was the person who sacrificed himself so that, you know, Luffy wouldn't die at the hands of Akainu. That's of course what happened during Marineford. I feel like, I don't know, for some reason, sometimes people forget. That happened to me once before, even though I don't know why. But yes, Ace like jumped in front. Akainu basically baited Ace by going for Luffy, knowing full well that Ace would come and try and protect his little brother. And that wound was so crazy, Luffy literally lost consciousness during that war when that happened. And so I absolutely understand if you're still looking at this and being like, Manu, I don't know, like a redemption arc for literally the worst person who did the worst thing that has ever happened to Luffy yet in the story. No freaking way. And I will agree to a certain point. Again, we will get to the really fun part, but I also think we can fairly talk about this first here, because I absolutely do think there is gonna be a fight between someone we consider to be good and Akainu. It's not gonna be like Akainu, actually the government is doing a bad job and I don't like them, and so Luffy, let me become your cabin boy. No, I don't think that's gonna happen. If Akainu has his like little redemption arc, it's gonna be a very slow drip, as it has kind of already been, and you know, there will be parts where he's still gonna clash with the people that he has made out to be the enemy for the longest time of his entire life. So again, I'm not saying that there's gonna be this casual fun little team up where Akainu shows up and is like, Luffy, I was wrong all along and I'm very sorry for killing your brother, and let's take on Imu together. That's not gonna happen. I am very much aware that that's not gonna happen. So even if Akainu has his little arc and becomes someone, you know, who tries to redeem himself, what happened with him and Ace and Luffy, it's never gonna like disappear. And you know, we can absolutely therefore ask the question, are they gonna fight? Is Luffy still gonna fight Akainu? Because obviously, we've kind of talked about this, the big three like enemies that, you know, Luffy has to defeat before the end of the story have always been Imu, Blackbeard, Akainu. And so I think you could absolutely make a fair point that Luffy is still gonna, you know, fight Akainu, and maybe it might even be that very fight, Luffy actually interacting with Akainu and kind of reflecting on him all his hatred and despise for like killing his brother who was actually a really good person, and then Akainu being in a weird spot where he's like, well, I'm already kind of doubting the government, and now we have this guy who's like cheered on by all these innocent people, and like, are we the baddies? Having like that kind of moment, I could absolutely see it. It would be revenge for Ace. It would be the symbolism of Luffy's scar that he very much, I forgot to talk about this, of course, carries on his chest wherever he goes. It's part of Luffy's iconic design after the time skip, the scar that he received from the fire that burned through Ace when he still, couldn't stop Akainu's attack 100%. Law still needed to perform emergency surgery on Luffy in order to have him survive this attack because, the lava just hit so hard, it still scorched him right there. And on top of all that, let's not kid ourselves, I think Oda knows very well that a lot of his fan base would be very disappointed, or maybe you could put it the other way, they would absolutely love the emotional payoff of Luffy actually being able to punch Akainu in the face really hard and make him really feel what he did, and looking in awe and kind of taken aback at this guy who, he thought was just a small fry that he could use to, lure out Dragon, lure out Ace, whatever it is. So yes, I think it could just be that, Akainu still sticks with the Marines for the longest time, but is more and more dissatisfied, kind of on the verge of disobeying and, deserting from the world government, but it might take this one additional fight to actually push him over the edge. Or it could, of course, also just be that, Imu comes and is like, Akainu, it looks like you're not particularly loyal to me anymore. Akainu is like, oh, you are the devil, the real enemy. You're not justice. And then Imu is just like, oh, now you figured it out. Domi Reversi. And then we have demon, crazy powerful Akainu, who's just this angry force of nature with like volcanoes emerging and erupting all around him. Either could be pretty cool, though I do think there would be more emotional payoff, again, if it's actually the real Akainu, and maybe whatever that fight is actually, fully pushes him over the edge. It could be Luffy, it would make so much sense because we just talked over all the setup that Oda has been putting in the story, but there are also a bunch of other characters I want to talk about that have pretty serious beef with Akainu and would make sense for a really big emotional fight too, that would kind of give, Oda the permission to show him take a big L, and then as a result of that, actually change his ways. So if not Luffy, which again I think would just be too good to pass upon, so it could be Luffy plus these people, or it could be instead of Luffy, I think Sabo makes obviously a ton of sense here. Sabo versus Akainu, right? After all, Fire versus Magma rematch, only this time Sabo the Flame Emperor, who I personally, and let me know in the comments if you'd agree or disagree, I personally kind of feel like Oda has been portraying Sabo as the slightly stronger version of Ace, where Ace kind of was a powerful pirate and, people, especially Whitebeard, kind of wanted to train him to become the next Pirate King. He almost had like not a lot of ambition. He was more happy being part of Whitebeard's big family and trying to make Whitebeard king of the pirates. Sabo, on the other hand, also the second in command of the revolutionaries, but Sabo has a lot more active drive and passion in the story. He's also now the replacement brother, kind of, right, after the time skip, and after the time skip is stronger than before the time skip. So I would make the argument that Sabo right now probably is stronger than Ace was during the war. Also, again, Ace just, I think, was nerfing himself by just being very dissatisfied with his life circumstances overall. Being ashamed for being Roger's son, feeling like he failed his crew, feeling like he failed Whitebeard, being scared for Luffy, kind of only sacrificing himself for Luffy, kind of actually allowed him to feel liberated and free and happy in that moment. We kind of learned from his backstory how sad and depressed he basically was the entire time. Sabo, on the other hand, he is the flame of the revolution. He's carrying Ace's inherited will and his devil fruit, and he's burning with the single goal of liberating the entire world from the injustice of the world government that the Marines are kind of the extended arm of. We're gonna talk about this again in the next section when we talk about Akainu's arc and the Marines overall, because I think you can make the argument that the Marines are kind of in a weird spot between, they're not fully the world government, they're not this fully evil organization, but very clearly they're corrupt, they're not as good as they make themselves out to be, and they are under the control of the literal devil. So that's not great, but there's still a good aspect to them, I would say. And so, yeah, I mean, I could absolutely see it. And again, Revolutionary Army versus the Marines kind of makes just a lot of sense. Sabo, Akainu, Sabo was also Ace's brother, so it would kind of fit very well. It could even be a matchup Sabo and Luffy versus Akainu. And staying here with the Revolutionary Army for just a moment, of course, we also have to talk about Dragon, who has this very weird relationship apparently with like Akainu. It's never been officially confirmed yet by Oda, but what's very clear is that Akainu, for some reason, has this insane hatred for Dragon specifically and the Revolutionary Army. And now that we have officially also, kind of gotten confirmation that yes, Dragon used to be a Marine and he's kind of the same age group as Akainu, I think the theory that they might have been absolute like pals and friends, and then Akainu felt betrayed for Dragon leaving the Marines, and not only that, Dragon then also starting the Revolutionary Army, which I think we kind of have to remember ourselves from like Akainu's perspective. The revolutionaries are this force that is, overthrowing kings and governments and islands and actively trying to sabotage the government, which he kind of sees as this ideal force of good that can't do any wrong, defending the free people against the evil pirates. So for him, the revolutionaries and his potential former friend Dragon running and founding them is like the ultimate act of betrayal. I think there is absolutely clearly going to be some sort of relationship in there where maybe Dragon and like Akainu were this tag team or something. They're like partners like Sengoku and Garp, or maybe Dragon was the person that Akainu even looked up to or something. Like something happened between the two on a personal level, I think. But beside whatever happened between them in their youth and as like young Marines, I also think that just on an ideological level, their clash would make a ton of sense and would be very iconic as well, because we have absolute justice and the Marines and the governments as the ultimate force of justice and, good, and true freedom, the revolutionaries who believe that people need to be liberated and that the absolute justice, ironically, would be getting rid of the world government. So in a way, they are similar, only that they have opposing views over what actually constitutes the true force of evil in the world, right? So I think that would be absolutely fun to see. And you just know that Dragon is the type of character who probably just being cool and walking in and dropping some chill lines can just absolutely break many of the other, cool characters in the story. Dragon just walking in and being like, you always were such a, hysteric person, Akainu, and Akainu just losing it over that. I think I can absolutely see that. Also, since we already have a bunch of Monkey family members, I think it's worth mentioning that I do think that Garp, the grandfather who almost already went and tried and killed Akainu during Marineford after he killed Ace, might come back for a rematch, especially now that it seems that Garp is probably not officially part of the Marines anymore, since he kind of like, he's associated with Sword and like they're kind of all doing their own thing. They went to Hachinosu not like without permission from the government, kind of being this rogue organization. It's very unclear right now what his status honestly is in the world government. We don't know if they would actually try and get him back from Blackbeard. My gut feeling would be no, that Garp has done too many things that kind of spit in the government's face. And on top of that, of course, Garp is like, just if he survives, inevitably gonna end up on Luffy's side this time. He's just like not gonna let another grandson of his actually die, especially at the hands of Akainu. So if there's ever any scene where maybe Akainu is about to overwhelm Luffy or kill him or something, I do think no way that Garp isn't jumping in this time. Again, another direct Ace revenge angle, maybe a cool parallel with Luffy this time, and Garp actually deciding to do the right thing and putting, his personal values and the right thing to do above his duties as a Marine. Also, let's be honest here, I think we all were just dying to actually find out how it would look like if Garp actually tried to kill and punch Akainu. I mean, everything that we've seen from Garp's past, he looked absolutely insane. He might literally have been the strongest Marine for a long time during his career in existence. Just, I felt like in the entire God Valley flashback, kind of outperforming Rocks and even Roger. Personally, I feel like what he did was just crazy. We had the Galaxy Impact recently on Hachinosu, seeing that Garp absolutely can still fight. He's older now, so I would feel that Akainu should probably be stronger, but Garp was easily one of the most broken characters in One Piece during his generation, and if he's really angry and putting everything into it, I just want to know what that looks like and see Akainu's stupid face after he gets punched by a Galaxy Impact. And then I have two more very interesting characters that might be really cool matches with Akainu that kind of either reveal something about him or flip him, or just if Akainu doesn't get this redemption arc that we're about to get into, then just be like a big middle finger in his face from the Marine side of things, because for one, we have his biggest rival, I guess, the person that he clashed with for 10 days and that he fought over the rule over the Marines with, which is Aokiji, Kuzan, who's now, of course, with the Blackbeard Pirates, but it would be just the perfect, like, setup to actually see what happened on Punk Hazard, but this time on a crazier scale, right? Actually happening in the manga with Aokiji coming back, maybe trying to reclaim the Marines, or Aokiji being like, I've come to actually, this time rebuild the Marines with like the good guys and like a good ideology. I could absolutely see that if Akainu doesn't get his redemption. That would be absolutely cool. Again, seeing the ice and magma like duel in action. I would love to see that. If we don't get that fight again in the story, I would at the very least hope that Oda shows us some, like, I need to see a little bit of that battle that kind of changed the entire layout of Punk Hazard. It's one of the most epic things that have happened in One Piece that we just never got to see so far. And then there is also Koby, a new generation Marine confronting the old system. I have a whole different video on Koby that I've been like kind of waiting for the right moment to drop. I don't know if you want to see that, please let me know. I've been kind of waiting for a good moment where Koby makes an appearance, but it might be a while. Low-key, even including Luffy, I think there is no character who has grown more and has grown faster and at a more alarming rate in the entire series, in the history of the series, than Koby. Koby, in 2 years, went from this to this. He went from a weak pink-haired boy to, like, one of the upcoming strongest Marines in the story, who's, like, very well on his way to actually fulfill his dream of becoming an Admiral, basically speed-running that entire thing. And I mean, there's just some crazy things going on there. There's also, obviously, the Hibari and Koby thing, which we'll get into in just a moment as well. There is the entire thing that, Akainu tried to kill Koby, and if Shanks hadn't been there, Akainu would have killed Koby. So Koby actually becoming Admiral level, which, again, I feel like is just gonna happen throughout the story. Oda has been speedrunning Koby there. If Koby reaches that and actually is able to spar with Akainu or even outclass Akainu towards the end of the story, what an insane moment, and also what a great way to potentially have Koby actually join Luffy's side, but while also kind of saying, well, Koby didn't become an actual Admiral yet, but he actually, like, at the very least, is strong enough to defeat the Fleet Admiral. I mean, that would be the ultimate hype for his character. But again, like, it could be either or none or multiple of the above. Much more interestingly, let's now actually move into the part of the video that I am the most excited about, because it's my favorite, personal agenda that I just really want to see happen, and I kind of really want to share in detail how I feel about this, why I feel that ever since the time skip, Oda has been setting up a major character shift and kind of flip for Akainu, for him potentially betraying the government and becoming a good guy. Let's get into that. So, will Akainu become a good guy? Here we go. To kind of give you a bit of an impression of where my mind is coming from here, I kind of want you to look at what Akainu as a character actually has been kind of built up to until the time skip. He's the one guy who's kind of the most crazy about the Marines. Like, when we go into the time skip, undoubtedly, especially after just having killed Ace, he seems like easily one of the most evil guys who are in the story. We've seen Akainu kill innocent people on Ohara. We have seen him be very much willing, well, he does kill Marines who are trying to run away during the Marineford War. He tries to kill Koby for trying to stop the war, and like, his entire ideology compared to the previous two admirals that we've met at this point, who are, Kizaru and Aokiji, who, Aokiji kind of good guy, Kizaru kind of bit murky. He's just absolute justice. All pirates are evil, the Marines and the government are good, and so it's as black and white as it gets, and for Akainu, it's even okay killing civilians if it means that no of the scholars of Ohara will go away, that, in the worst case, just to get rid of any pirates, anyone who is like going against the government and the Marines and who's like posing any threat, he's willing to absolutely, just have collateral damage if that means that these people are taken out. So for him, he's actually like weighing literal lives. Like, while someone like Aokiji would probably be like, well, if I have to, kill another person, then I'm probably not gonna do it. It's not gonna be worth it. Yeah, for Akainu, like hostage or like blackmail is not gonna work. He is just gonna take out whoever necessary, even if you're completely innocent. And so during the time skip, what clearly seems to happen is that, well, he's fighting against Aokiji. Aokiji kind of was always presented as this more liberal guy. He's like the person who wants a more fair justice, who sees people like Luffy and is like, okay, there are good pirates, there are bad Marines. Overall, I think that the Marines are better than pirates, but he kind of makes his decision based on the situation and based what he knows about those people. In the end though, in their duel, Akainu comes back out on top and the message seems pretty clear. Going forward, the Marines are gonna be even more hardline than they were before. Sengoku, who was, kind of in like this weird neutral gray area because he is friends with Garp and seems reasonable and allows, Shanks to end the war, but at the same time, he's still a pretty, strong hardliner. But we, upgrade to Akainu, who's now basically, pushing the Marines to just completely go after absolute justice. No more gray zone, no more mercy. All pirates need to die, all revolutionaries need to die. Anyone who goes against the Marines or the government needs to be taken out because they are evil. In order to achieve that, he takes Marineford and puts the headquarters into the New World, which has before that kind of just been ruled by the emperors and was kind of this untouched territory with just a few Marine outposts. No. He wants to stick it to the big guys and moves the entire Marine operation into that part of the New World. So how are we coming from that status quo that we kind of encountered during and after Fishman Island and Punk Hazard, where we learn about all of this? How do we go from that to me now, to me now saying, I'm falling out of my chair, but also me saying, this guy is about to have a redemption arc by Oda and might end up betraying the very government he seems to love so much. And I really feel that even though, of course, Oda has kind of set it up in the first half of the story by portraying him as this absolute crazy hardline idealist, who has his dogma that he just follows no matter what, everyone needs to die who's evil. Now, ever since the time skip, ever since he's basically reached his goal of reaching the top of the Marine hierarchy and becoming Fleet Admiral, I think Oda, every single time that Akainu is on screen, he keeps giving him these little moments that kind of seem to build to something really changing or already having changed within him while Luffy was out training. I think the best starting point for this entire redemption arc is obviously the little artwork, once again, that we referenced earlier, that Oda drew of Akainu as a kid, where very clearly Akainu must have some kind of very tragic and sad backstory. He's apparently from a place in the North Blue where he grew up in a lot of poverty. Again, he looks like a pirate here. It looks like whatever happened, he needed to fight for his survival, and I would just bet my butt here that it was pirates who were responsible for, causing a lot of pain and suffering in Akainu's life when he was young, maybe killing his family, something like that, right? Very clearly, there's a deep trauma when it comes to piracy and the way that he views the world, and him joining the Marines, presumably, to bring an end to piracy so that people would not have to grow up in the same circumstances and live through what he had lived through. I think we can all pretty much, expect there to be some sort of small or slightly extended flashback for Akainu's backstory. And it's something that Oda has been doing with a lot of people who are kind of questionable. Even Blackbeard in the most recent God Valley flashback has been already getting the very sad 2-year-old who lost his dad, who was actually kind of a nice guy backstory. And Oda already prepping Blackbeard for making him a little bit more human. The same thing is already happening and has been happening with Akainu. So keeping in mind that he probably has this tragic backstory, right, and all of that, let's now move into what has happened ever since he became Fleet Admiral. For starters, when Akainu before was this guy who would be always out, taking action, being in the front lines, taking out pirates, throw me into battle, I have the most broken devil fruit, I'm one of the strongest guys. Now, as Fleet Admiral, all we ever see him do is sit behind a desk, go through paperwork, and just be more and more frustrated with everything that happens. Very clearly what has happened is that Akainu, having been moved from, the front lines into the desk job now, he's kind of realized how little independence and freedom the Marines actually have. I think before that, probably Sengoku did a pretty good job at buffering whatever the Gorosei were up to with, his way of running the Marines, and I don't think that most of the people in the Marines, with maybe the exception of Garp, actually were fully aware just how strong the power and pull of the Gorosei, and then, of course, behind them, Imu, actually was on anything that the Marines have been doing. So now, being in that same position, Akainu over and over again seems to realize, whenever I think I want to do something, or I think this would be the good or right thing to do for the Marines or for the people of the world, if there is something that the Gorosei want to get done or that Imu wants to get done, there is nothing that Akainu can do. He just needs to do whatever that he's being told. And increasingly, we see these moments where he just gets more and more frustrated whenever he's on the phone with the Gorosei, or whenever he's actually visiting them and meeting them up on in their castle in Marijua, right? It's actually kind of, at the beginning, it was kind of fun to see, Akainu just struggling with the bureaucracy and the higher class just imposing their personal interests onto this organization that for him always was a force of pure justice for the good of the world. It starts gnawing at him. Now, being a fleet admiral, and I mean, the admirals already have a certain level of access to the Holy Land, but now as a fleet admiral, he spends a lot more time up there seeing how the Celestial Dragons actually are kind of being, told to kind of sit down, shut up, and do your job by the Gorosei over and over again. He really starts to fundamentally question, I think, at this point in the story, what the Marines actually are. I think Akainu has this arc of realizing, in many little sequences we get between the arcs and during Wano and in between whenever we see him, of him realizing that the Marines just are not the organization that he thought they actually were, now that he's the person who kind of receives the orders. No idea what Kong actually is doing. I don't know. He theoretically should be in between the fleet admiral and the Gorosei, kind of overseeing the Marines and the Cypher Pole agencies, but honestly, no idea what Kong actually does. Work-wise, maybe he just chills, seems to be what's actually happening. So I now want to give you some more concrete examples of specific moments in the story where I feel like Oda is building a character arc with a payoff here. For starters, we have a bunch of scenes where he's just shouting at the Gorosei and very clearly is frustrated with just, having to do what they want him to do, even though he seems it's, not the right thing to do for the Marines. Then there is a really interesting scene when we first know that Kaido and Big Mom make their alliance on Wano, and it turns out that Akainu, who hates pirates and who's willing to sacrifice his own men so readily before that, he's ready to sacrifice civilians on Ohara, he's ready to sacrifice Marines who run away from battle, suddenly his call now as Fleet Admiral is, I'm not gonna send troops to Wano just because of that, because, I'm not feeding any of my innocent people to two of these monsters. Is this the same guy? Just this moment alone should very clearly show you that in the last 2 years, Akainu had a fundamental change in his view, very clearly responsibility and leadership, even though on the surface it doesn't really seem to suit him. It actually kind of has done a pretty good job with, changing his personality in view of the value of his people. Now, with him calling the shots, he doesn't just want to throw 2,000, 3,000, 5,000 Marines as fodder at Kaido and Big Mom when it doesn't make sense and it clearly it wouldn't change anything. He also doesn't want to send any admirals because, he doesn't want to lose and endanger any of his comrades. Very clearly, we get that later on in Egghead Island with Kizaru. Actually, we might as well skip to that point because it is just maybe the most fundamentally what the heck is going on moment with Akainu's entire character arc. So, Kizaru himself gets one of the best, I think, mini character arcs we get after the time skip during the entire Egghead Island fight scene, where it's very clear that he is, with his unclear justice, stuck between his love for his friends, Vegapunk, Bonnie, Kuma, and fulfilling his role as a cog in the machine, as a part of the government. And he just is breaking slowly over the course of the entire Egghead Island fight, trying to, do his duty. He's very clearly saying, what I care about doesn't matter. I'm like part of this organization. Which, by the way, just makes me curious what happened in Kizaru's own past. Also very fascinating. But basically, he's like, okay, I'm gonna do what I have to do. He kills Vegapunk, he fights Kuma. The moment he kills Vegapunk, all fight just drains from him. There's this scene where like we have Gear 5 Giant Luffy grabbing him in Saturn, and Kizaru is just like, whatever, man. I'm the worst piece of garbage. Like, do whatever you want to me. He's just a broken man. By the way, in case you're wondering, I don't even think that Kizaru went even close to, going all out on Egghead Island. Very clearly, he's just like so stuck in his head between what he's supposed to do, and even when he does kill Vegapunk afterwards, he just, completely surrenders to the situation, especially when all the Gorosei appear. Turns out then in the end, he is actually the one who's feeding Luffy. So he is actually cheering on Luffy, making an offering to the Sun God, and really like kind of showing his, like actually following his heart there in secret. Oda kind of dropping it then, I think, in a question corner after that. That's what happened. So we have already that crazy moment with Kizaru after already having Fujitora, who's already kind of a good guy and against the government, and after Aokiji, who clearly doesn't like the direction that the government is going, right? We now have Kizaru doing it, and he's then on the phone after Egghead Island with Akainu, who's like, what the hell happened, man? And he's like, yo, you gotta leave me alone. I just had to kill one of my best friends and fight all the people I love in my life. How would you like to do this? And what does Akainu do? Akainu feels sorry for Kizaru. He apologizes to him. He's like, I'm sorry, you're absolutely right. Like, it must have been really hard for you. We see this like friendship and relationship between Akainu and Kizaru, but also Akainu is apologizing as the fleet admiral to Kizaru for following his personal feelings and like having to kill his friends. Do you see how fundamentally, like, that's a completely different person than the person that we met up until the time skip? This is someone who has completely different ideals suddenly. Like, they're bleeding through still. He's still like trying to be tough and stuff. But like, he's forgiving Kizaru. He's like, oh my god, okay, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize you had to go through all that. That's the same guy who was willing to like kill children in order to make sure that no one escapes from Ohara. Very clearly, stuff is happening in his head. We also have the entire moment during Egghead Island where Kuma is climbing the red line to get to the Holy Land. And what happens? He encounters Akainu, and Akainu already doesn't really want to fight Kuma, and he says, oh, just a cog in the machine, obviously giving like this little speech that Kuma is just this like robot who's being taken care of by the world government, but saying it with such a sad face that it's very obvious that he's kind of talking about himself here. It's very clear that Akainu is seeing himself now as a cog in the machine who's kind of not doing the thing that he actually thinks is right. Again, Akainu showing so much more just empathy suddenly and like understanding and being so much in doubt of what he's doing there is actually the right thing to do. I also think that his encounter with Luffy and seeing what like Luffy has achieved and kind of seeing how the world reacts to him, I do think that it also has a little bit of an effect on him where he's like, wait, are they actually bad people? Like, actually? Again, stuff is happening in the background there. It's these little moments, right? I want you to actually, when you go back through the story or whenever Akainu now pops up in the future, pay attention to this. This man is on the brink of already rebelling to the world government. I think there are kind of two ways here. Either Akainu is gonna like take the Marines and break them off potentially from the world government, kind of saying, okay, very clearly we're just like this expendable force of people for you that, you don't even need. You have the Holy Knights and all these things, and Imu is fighting themselves now. You're also just using the Marines for your own purposes, kind of exploiting the world, like pretending like we're caring for the innocents, but kind of just policing stuff and like kind of threatening people and blackmailing them to send you the heavenly tribute and stuff like that. We're gonna actually try and build a marine force that is independent and fights for justice. That could be something that's happening because all of the admirals kind of are going in that direction. We like the Marines, but we want the Marines to actually be what they pretend to be, a force for good. Or it could also be that Akainu is just like, okay, this isn't working, I'm gonna do my own thing, and maybe leaves the Marines just like Aokiji did. Now, this one is a little bit more tricky because I don't really know where Akainu would go. Again, he has that relationship with dragons, so you could maybe make an argument that is he gonna join the Revolutionary Army? I don't know, it feels very weird after like hating dragons so much, but I mean, maybe he goes solo or something or joins some other group. Imagine Akainu at Cross Guild, that'd be kind of crazy. But yeah, I just wanted to throw it out there as an option. Or, and maybe you've already wondered if I would bring it up, there's of course the secret third option that Akainu from the very beginning has already been working against the government behind the shadows anyways as a member of SWORD, being kind of in cahoots with Aokiji and just building and working on the Marines from the background without the government oversight. In other words, is Akainu part of SWORD? You might have already heard about the idea that Akainu might actually be part of SWORD. Now, there's a couple of reasons for this, but let's start with the most obvious one that kind of spawned these theories to begin with. There is this cover story, or it's like actually a cover art right here of Akainu doing his favorite hobby, bonsai cultivation. And what we see there is not only a Akainu who kind of like we talked about before is a lot more delicate, like obviously the angry magma guy cutting bonsai and taking care of delicate, plants is kind of already like a very big clash by itself, kind of going hand in hand with what we talked about earlier. But then we also, of course, have the very weird tattoo of a sword on his arm that is usually covered up. Covered up, by the way, by his cool Hawaiian shirt, which also has like the weird flower aesthetic and imagery going on. Again, Hawaii shirt, not exactly what you'd expect from someone who likes to commit basically genocide, right? So already pretty interesting and kind of plays a little bit into the this guy isn't exactly who we think he is, style overall. So based on this little tattoo, like people have speculated, half jokingly, half like seriously, that Akainu might actually be a member or even the secret head of the SWORD organization. Now, quick recap on SWORD. SWORD is actually this little rogue organization within the Marines, which is secret, kept a secret from the higher-ups, kept a secret from, most importantly, the world government, and they technically are all Marines that have left the Marines but are still associated with it in order that they can actually do things independently of the world government, which kind of fits in pretty perfectly with everything we just talked about. Think about it. At first glance, Akainu being associated with this, organization of rogues who kind of like are comprised of good people like Kobe and all these guys that we see right here, it feels kind of odd because Akainu seems to be at odds with all of them and he doesn't like people stepping out of line, it seems, as, he killed the people who did at Marineford. But on the other hand, SWORD is basically doing exactly what Akainu has been kind of struggling with, what we talked about in the previous section. SWORD wants to be a version of the Marines that's independent of, the influence of the top brass of the Gorosei, the Celestial Dragons, and Imu, and wants to actually, be able to create justice and protect the people of the world and do, what they think is actually the right thing to do, which kind of, again, I think is in line with what Akainu has been struggling with anyways. All of that in combination with these weird details from this cover story, they kind of feel oddly too intentional to just, be used randomly for one of the hardest and apparently most cold-hearted, brutal characters in the entire show. I don't buy that this is just a joke. But that's of course not the only thing that would be tying Akainu to SWORD either, because, well, who else is in SWORD? One of the most iconic SWORD members that we know about is of course DS Drake, our guy here who we all thought was a pirate, but was actually an undercover Marine infiltrating one of the Yonko crews, Kaido's crew, to gather information and know what's up in Wano, where the Marines had no other means of actually getting any information from. Like the Cypherpol agencies were there, but they don't talk to the Marines really, and the Cypherpol agents were actually making business, as we found out, between the government and Kaido behind the Marines' back. So, DS Drake was actually like the Marines' proper only eyes and ears there. Now, this is of course interesting because we have another former Marine who is now part of a pirate crew, a very notorious Yonko crew, who has a very close relationship with Akainu. We're of course talking about Cruzan, right? Who has, after their weird duel, now joined the Blackbeard Pirates. he froze all of them and then joined them and is now one of the Titanic captains, which again, we don't need, like, Kuzan is like a different story, but he is the goodest of the admirals ever since he was introduced, helping Robin, protecting her, protecting Saul, you know, like protecting, kind of even standing against all the atrocities that Akainu was actually committing on Ohara, right? So him suddenly joining up with the most ruthless of all the Yonko crews seems very weird, especially since we now know that Sword exists and that they like sending people undercover into pirate crews. The idea here, of course, also not a new one, has been then that potentially Akainu and Aokiji just staged their big fight potentially, that there wasn't this big strive for who would actually succeed in the Marines and who would go to Blackbeard. Maybe it was more like we're still gonna fight, but it's mostly gonna be like who does what, right? Am I gonna run the Marines and you're gonna go to Blackbeard, or am I gonna go to Blackbeard, you run the Marines? And then in the end, they actually were like kind of in cahoots with each other, but needed to really sell it. So they really actually did go all out, but maybe Akainu and Aokiji are actually like in agreement that the Marines need to change, that Blackbeard is dangerous. So Aokiji, after their fight, after pretending like they had their falling out, leaves the Marines, but stays in Sword, the classic thing that they do, resigning. That is what we know that their entire shtick is, right? And then infiltrates the Blackbeard pirates, while Akainu kind of does the I'm gonna stay behind and try to protect the Marines and prepare things from the inside, right? Like kind of, actually now that I think about it, very similarly to Dragon and Garp after God Valley. They both saw these like the crazy cruelty of the Celestial Dragons, and you know, Saturn and Emu was there. They both knew how messed up it was, but Dragon was like, I can't stand this anymore, I'm gonna have to leave and do my own thing, while then Garp was like, okay, I agree, but I'm gonna try and like change the Marines from within. Kind of gives me the same vibes here, potentially with Akainu and Aokiji as well. But there is also more, because let me bring your attention to this lovely lady right here, who is a member of Sword. Her name, in case you don't know, is Hibari. Now, Hibari is very interesting because she speaks with a very unique dialect in the anime. She speaks also, not only in the anime, by the way, in the manga, like the way, like the little phrases she uses and the way she ends sentences. She is a character portrayed with a Hiroshima accent from the city or prefecture of Hiroshima. You might have heard about it. I went there recently for the road trip, by the way, with my parents. Saw like the atomic dome, ooh, Jesus Christ. But very much worth the trip though, fantastic. Like beautiful city, very heavy if you go to the museum. Either way, Hibari speaks with a Hiroshima accent, and the only other character in the entire story of One Piece that has the same dialect and accent as Hibari is none other than Blackbeard. No, of course not. It's Akainu. Akainu and Hibari share the exact same dialect and speaking mannerisms. They're the only characters who have this Hiroshima-style language. And of course, in case you're curious, Oda does this a lot, and like Japanese manga and like anime likes doing this a lot in general, taking different dialects and aspects of different areas of Japan and kind of distinguishing their characters a little bit that way. So this makes these two characters very unique. Now, do the parallels end there? I mean, first of all, I feel like you could kind of see it if someone said, oh yeah, she is Akainu's daughter. You can kind of see it, right? I think it's not super far-fetched, but there is a lot more. Both of them actually are from the North Blue, and both share the same blood type. We learned this from the Weaver cards, where we learn more about a lot of the characters' backstories. So same origin, North Blue, same blood type. They also have like the weird flower thing in common, because of course, you know, we see Akainu again with the bonsai, and then he wears the flower shirt, and also a Hibari is this, a type of rose, which kind of matches the flower motive that, you know, Akainu is going on. He has the shirt, and he even has the, like, I'm not tripping, right? Akainu has the flower on his shirt, like the little stick-in flower. I'm not imagining that, right? Let me quickly check. Yeah. Literally, it looks like Akainu has a Hibari rose, the same flower, on his like little shirt here, the pink one. So what else do you want? Like basically, it feels almost kind of like with Frankie and Queen. It's like basically guaranteed that these two are related. And of course, if Hibari, his daughter, is in Sword, that doesn't automatically guarantee that Akainu is in Sword as well, but take that, and the Aokiji part, and the tattoo, and all the things that we've talked about with Akainu being such a completely fundamentally different character after the time skip, after he like gets into this position and after his fight with Aokiji, And I think you could make a very strong argument for that being the case. It's also, of course, kind of funny because Hibari has like a massive thing for Kobe, is like the biggest Kobe fan, which, you know, kind of creates as a little bit ironic and dramatic connection between Akainu, who kind of tried to kill Kobe during the war, but then potentially now working together. Now, the possible idea here is kind of that Akainu may have always been part of this deeper marine faction operating deep independently from the world government, or he might have just joined after, you know, everything that he learned during the time skip and becoming a member, or becoming basically Fleet Admiral and having like a more direct access to the government. I personally don't really know if he would have had like this complete change of heart already like early on, because it feels like during the war, at least to me, but let me know if you feel differently. It feels like during the war at Marineford before the time skip, he's already pretty hardcore still, right? The way we see him in the flashback for Ohara. But maybe at that point, he already was kind of like playing a role, or kind of, you know, trying to do the Garp thing and staying in the Marines to kind of protect them from the inside out. That would be very cool. And if Sword were to represent the true Marines, quote unquote, with Kobe and so on and so forth, then Akainu being secretly connected to them would honestly massively recontextualize his entire character. Imagine we find out that Akainu actually, behind the curtains, has been working against the Celestial Dragons and everything. Imagine Akainu's hate for Dragon just being like a complete play. It's like, okay, you know, like, I love you, bro, but I'm gonna have to really sell this to the IOPS, so I'm gonna be calling you out and be coming after you hard. Maybe they're in cahoots. Maybe, I mean, to be fair, there are like some weird overlaps, obviously, between like some of the characters in Sword and the Revolutionaries, and they kind of want the same thing, because when you think about it, Dragon explicitly said that he doesn't want to abolish the Marine system. He wants to keep that. He just wants to get rid of the Celestial Dragons. So maybe Dragon and Akainu, ironically enough, might kind of be after the same thing here and might just have slightly different approaches, kind of similarly, again, to Dragon and Garp after God Valley. Just some food for thought. That would be a very big twist, obviously, but I would absolutely dig it. Which now, of course, brings us to the next section, which is, what do I actually think the fate of the Marines will be towards the end of the story? And then, of course, once presumably Luffy has liberated the world and we're in the fourth age, or the fourth era, or the fourth world of the One Piece like history, right? And we're like in the future, like Boruto, Two Piece. Are there gonna be Marines? And if so, what are they gonna look like? I think the real question we have to ask here is, does Akainu actually have a place within a reformed Marine system if it were to stick around towards the end of the story? Which, if you're asking me, is really what Oda seems to be going for. We have so many Marines on the spectrum, from kind of like neutral but friendly towards Luffy, with like people like, you know, like Kizaru, to then people who like really like Luffy, Fujitora, Aokiji, who would probably return in some fashion, I assume, and then of course Garp, Kobe. Like, there's a whole spectrum of characters that I think would probably have a place in a reformed, you know, Marine system, actually to the point where like almost all the admirals at this point have some sort of redemption arc going on, with the only exception I can think of really being Green Bull, who's just the biggest like douche and also a Akainu fanboy. So maybe if Akainu went over, he would too. But would Akainu have a place here to begin with? Well, I mean, I would kind of be curious to hear your thoughts, because again, very clearly I have a strong opinion that yes, based on everything we talked about today, I think he might very well have one. Either he is just part of Sword, and that already shows that he's kind of been working against the government and for a better world from behind the scenes, playing a role, or if that's not the case, then at the very least he has an ongoing character arc right now after the time skip that Oda has kept escalating towards him very clearly going against whatever the government is doing. That, of course, doesn't necessarily mean that Akainu himself needs to stay or even be accepted in a reformed Marine force. Again, it might just be that Akainu breaks off from the government and the Marines altogether and just does his own thing, maybe then not even surviving the end of the story, depending really on if you personally think if Oda went that direction, would Akainu be redeemable or not? He would probably have to do something absolutely crazy like save Luffy's life or save another Straw Hat in order to ever be actually fully redeemed. But even if he doesn't manage that, if he dies in the process of actually, you know, figuring out that the right thing to do is stand against Imu, and then sacrifice his life, that would honestly also just be a lot and kind of have him like as a tragic but very satisfying character arc in the entire story at the end of One Piece, which I would absolutely love to see. And again, I kind of feel like Oda has been setting up so strongly that I would almost be disappointed at this point if this didn't have some payoff in like some way, shape, or form, right? I hope you see at this point what I mean. Another option, of course, could also be that the Marines just get split, and even though like they continue existing to a certain degree, it just isn't one giant world-spanning force. I think that kind of depends a little bit on what Oda's actual vision for the end of the story is, if there's going to be another world government, or if it's more like little districts and countries and islands ruling themselves. That will have to, we will have to wait and see how that turns out. And I feel like depending on that, the fate and structure of the Marines will also kind of, go into one direction or the other. Personally, for me, I feel like for the future Marine lineup, Fujitora almost feels guaranteed to already defect from the current system. He's like kind of in a weird spot anyways. I kind of been wondering if Fujitora is maybe even like infiltrating the Marines from like the revolutionary side, because he's like just a great guy and very clearly like all he cares about is actually making a fair system, and he's working from the inside already to do good things. Pretty much the most likely candidate for me to just help rebuild the Marines into a stronger force afterwards, and could even make a great next fleet admiral. After all, he looks very wise. Then there is Kobe, who of course again kind of represents the future Garp figure, who is like his new prodigy and who Garp has been training up to kind of take his place. We also know that his dream has been becoming an admiral, and it's kind of the first dream next to Luffy's of becoming king of the pirates that we actually get in the story in chapter 2. So Kobe fulfilling that dream by the end of the story feels kind of like it's been too much of a setup so early on to not pay off in some way, and it would just make sense for him to be one of the faces of a new Marine organization driven by compassion instead of fear and authority. And then I once again want to throw Kizaru into the mix here, because again, he's already kind of shown signs of emotional conflict during Eckett Island. We kind of went through it a little bit. He may have secretly helped Luffy more than we realized throughout like the past few arcs, and I don't know, could maybe even fully side with the Straw Hats once he learns that Vegapunk actually survived, because he already seems to be strongly regretting what he's been doing, and might also just feel obligated to atone or even help Kuma and Bonnie at this point, depending on what actually happens to Kuma and Bonnie. Speaking of which, Kuma and Bonnie still on Elbaf, in case you haven't noticed. Vegapunk also still on Elbaf, both in the form of Lilith and the weird clone that we learned was there that has not been paid off, and the laboratory. Now, personally, I've been kind of feeling that it really should be the case that at this point the Straw Hats just get completely wiped out here in Elbaf, just to raise these stakes for the end of the story, to raise the stakes for everything that's going to happen. Also with Akainu and all these characters we talked about today. If not, what are we doing? But that might also mean that the Straw Hats might need another way to get away and scatter and maybe train and get stronger, kind of like what happened on Sabaody, which really seems to parallel what's happening right here. And if you want to know how I think that, these characters could play into this, including Kuma and Bonnie and like Lilith, and what that might mean for the Straw Hats, and if someone might even die, and if they're gonna get stronger, you can check that video out right here. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Thanks to our fantastic Patreons who I forgot to plug, but if you want to support the channel, please do that. I've also been streaming on Twitch again. You can find the link in the bio. And yeah, otherwise, let me know if you have any other ideas for these freestyle videos. Super fun doing them. Love to do more. I'll see you in the next one, next week a chapter. Bye.